In a move that sent shockwaves through the region, Chinese warships completed a near month-long circumnavigation of Australia. This unprecedented display of naval power, conducted without prior notice, raised serious concerns about China's intentions and its growing military assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. The world watched as a flotilla of 3 Chinese warships, consisting of the destroyer CNS Zunyi, the frigate CNS Hongyang, and the replenishment ship CNS Waishanhu, made their presence known. They weren't there for a friendly visit. This was a show of force, a clear signal that China is a dominant force in the region. The operation began quietly in early February 2025. The warships entered Australian waters through the Torres Strait, a narrow passage separating Australia and Papua New Guinea. Their presence did not go unnoticed, but the full extent of their mission was about to become all too clear. The warship's presence took a more provocative turn on February 21st. A routine Virgin Australia flight, cruising at high altitude, intercepted a chilling radio transmission, a warning about imminent live fire drills. The Chinese warships, positioned approximately 300 nautical miles off the Australian coast in the Tasman Sea, were not there for a leisurely cruise. They were there to make a statement. News of the live fire exercises, coming without any prior warning from Beijing, sent shockwaves through Australian defense circles and beyond. The Australian public, accustomed to relative peace and stability in their region, were left to grapple with the unsettling reality of China's growing military might right on their doorstep. The incident exposed a critical vulnerability in Australia's maritime surveillance capabilities. Astonishingly, the first indication of the live fire drills came not from Australia's own defense systems, but from the pilot of a commercial airliner. Admiral David Johnson, the highest-ranking officer in the Royal Australian Navy, was forced to admit that authorities were only alerted to the drills a full 28 minutes after they had commenced. The reaction from Australian defense officials was swift and unambiguous. The Australian Defence Force, with the assistance of New Zealand, immediately moved to track the movements of the Chinese flotilla. Public statements from high-ranking officials expressed deep concern about the strategic implications of the maneuver and the apparent gaps in Australia's ability to monitor activity within its own exclusive economic zone. The incident also ignited a firestorm of criticism directed at the government's handling of the situation. Shadow Defense Minister Andrew Hastie, a vocal critic of China's actions in the region, wasted no time in launching a scathing attack on the government's response. Australia was tested, Hastie declared, and found lacking. The Prime Minister, already facing mounting pressure from within his own party and from an increasingly anxious public, found himself at the center of a rapidly escalating national security crisis. As the Chinese warships continued their journey, their route took them through strategically significant waters, further raising tensions in the region. After the live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea, the flotilla proceeded westward, hugging the Australian coastline. On March 4th, the warships reached Perth, a major port city on Australia's western coast. Their presence was unmistakable, coming within a mere 170 nautical miles of the mainland. Perth, a hub of Australia's energy and mining industries, suddenly found itself uncomfortably close to a potent symbol of China's growing military reach. The international community, particularly countries in the Indo-Pacific region, watched the unfolding events with a mixture of apprehension and concern. New Zealand, Australia's close ally and partner in the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, reacted with particular alarm. New Zealand's Defence Minister Judith Collins, in a statement that reflected the growing unease in Wellington, expressed her deep concern over the incident. Collins highlighted the advanced weaponry and capabilities of the Chinese warships, noting the unprecedented nature of such a military display in such close proximity to New Zealand's shores. China's response to the international outcry was a calculated mix of nonchalance and defiance. Chinese officials maintained that the naval exercises were routine operations for a major power and were conducted entirely within international waters. They argued that China, like any other sovereign nation, had the right to operate its navy in international waters. Ambassador Xiao Qian, China's top diplomat in Canberra, sought to downplay the significance of the incident. He insisted that the operations were part of a routine training exercise and that China had no intention of threatening or intimidating Australia. However, the lack of prior notification, a standard diplomatic courtesy, particularly for exercises of this scale and sensitivity, spoke volumes. Despite the diplomatic efforts to downplay the event, the underlying message from Beijing was clear. China, with its rapidly expanding naval capabilities, was determined to assert its presence in the Indo-Pacific region. The circumnavigation of Australia was not merely a military exercise, it was a carefully calibrated demonstration of China's growing power and a stark warning to any nation that dared to challenge its ambitions. A social media post from the Chinese embassy in Canberra further exacerbated tensions. The post, couched in the language of national pride and military readiness, declared that China was ready for any type of conflict with the United States. This blunt statement, coming at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions, did little to assuage concerns about China's ultimate intentions. Outmatched and outgunned, Australia's military preparedness. The Chinese warships' circumnavigation of Australia served as a stark wake-up call for Australian defense planners. It laid bare the growing disparity between China's rapidly modernizing navy and Australia's own more modest naval capabilities. The incident highlighted a sobering reality. In a head-to-head confrontation, Australia's navy would be hopelessly outmatched. To put the disparity in perspective, the 3 Chinese warships that circumnavigated Australia carried a combined total of 144 missile launchers. Shockingly, this number nearly equaled the total number of missile launchers, 200, deployed across the entire Australian Navy. This stark comparison highlighted the significant firepower gap between the 2 navies. Adding to Australia's woes, the incident coincided with a period of significant maintenance downtime within the Royal Australian Navy. Both of Australia's auxiliary oiler replenishment ships, vital for refueling and resupplying warships at sea, were out of commission at the time. This meant that Australia's ability to sustain any kind of prolonged naval operation, let alone counter a potential threat from China, was severely compromised. The incident forced Australia to confront an uncomfortable truth. Its current defense posture, heavily reliant on the United States for its security umbrella, was no longer sufficient to meet the challenges of a more assertive and militarily powerful China. The government's long-standing policy of balancing its close economic ties with China with its security alliance with the United States was being put to the test as never before. As Australia and China navigate these turbulent waters, the path forward remains uncertain. Will diplomatic channels open, fostering dialogue and de-escalation? Or are we on the brink of a more severe conflict, with military posturing giving way to actual confrontation? International observers are calling for cooler heads to prevail. The United Nations and other global institutions are urging both nations to come to the negotiating table. They argue that the stakes are too high for rash decisions. The economic and human costs of a potential conflict could be devastating, not only for Australia and China, but for the entire region and beyond. However, the reality on the ground is complex. National pride, historical grievances, and strategic interests are all at play. Australia's alliances, particularly with the United States, add another layer of complexity to the situation. The US has already voiced its support for Australia, but how far they are willing to go remains to be seen. On the other hand, China sees its naval maneuvers as a legitimate assertion of its growing power and regional influence. Any perceived weakness could embolden other nations to challenge its authority, something Beijing is keen to avoid. The coming weeks and months will be critical. Both nations have much to gain from peace and much to lose from conflict. The world watches with bated breath, hoping that wisdom and diplomacy will triumph over aggression and hostility. In the end, the choice between diplomacy and conflict lies in the hands of the leaders of Australia and China. The decisions they make now will shape the future of their nations and the global order for years to come.